Come on, Kyle. Give us an outdoor stream, they said. And lo, Kyle delivered. And lo, he spaketh. And it was known all across the land that Kyle would be streaming into the outdoors. I'm just making sure that I'm live because this is a slightly different setup than normal. Look at that handsome devil. So what is up, folks? How's it hanging? The end of the universe as we know it. So, Coney Baloney, our new Supreme Court justice, who will be whisked through the confirmation process and onto the bench as quickly as possible, right? So that Trump has his insurance come election day because I don't know that he's entirely sure how Kennedy's going to vote if the election comes down to the Supreme Court. I think that the dynamic is such that he thinks there's going to be a of course, he has a 5-3 court right now. If he goes to the election, he's probably in a position to think that Kennedy's not going to want to single-handedly decide the election, even though his vote is not super consequential, and he would rather send it to a 4-4 because then I think that kicks it back to the Senate. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure that would kick it back to the Senate, and that way Kennedy's not in the position of having to take a stand on such a controversial issue. But if Barrett is on the court already and it becomes a 6-3 majority, then Kennedy's vote doesn't matter at that point. It doesn't fall on Kennedy. It falls on all of them together, and um, you know, then they don't care, and they can decide it much easier that way. Now, granted, I don't know. Like Kennedy may just be like, "Nah, screw it, vote Trump, you win." But it's really hard to say. I was reading a piece by Alex Perrine today about, or no, was that? I think it was from a couple of weeks ago that he wrote that was basically talking about how we could be 2, maybe 3 weeks out from election night. So, week of Thanksgiving, basically, before we have a definitive answer on who the president is. And I don't think that um, people are ready for that. I don't think that people are ready for that sort of uncertainty. I think it's going to pull at the already very, very, very loose thread that is the social cohesion of this country. And so we have to think about what our response to this is going to be just as a population, right? I think that it's important that we have a conversation with people about the fact that, like, hey, you're going to turn on your television on November 3rd, and it's going to look like Trump obliterated Biden. And you need to understand that that's not the real count, and that there are more votes, and that there is more shit to go through. I don't know how much that's going to help. And you got to imagine we're all going to be sitting here right around the holidays with our fucking Gen X and Boomer like relatives who are just going to be completely lost. I mean, they're just going to be completely lost. It's largely going to be driven by the media, what people's reaction to this is, and largely the media's move so far has been to kind of fetishize, almost like get off on the idea that there's going to be like an actual power struggle in the aftermath of the election. It's almost like they want that to be the case because it would just be the last escalation of the big like television series bullshit that we've been playing out for 4 years. I think it's just basically them being like, oh no no, everything has to have a finality, like it's written for Hollywood or something. And if that's the case, then the season finale, ha 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 ha, and uh, the army has to go in and drag him out, or the National Guard, or whatever the hell, Secret Service, whatever the hell, has to go in and drag him out. And it strikes me as very, very odd. It strikes me as very, very odd. I got to be honest, that um, the media in particular, but also just regular like mainstream Democrats are just kind of like jerking off about this idea. Like they're just like, no no, you don't understand. And I think I've realized why that is. It's because these people have been telling us, right? These people have been telling us over and over and over and over and over and over and over again until we just want to die that Trump is a threat to all of our institutions, all of our norms, democracy itself, the construction of the universe in every way that we know it. And it really hasn't come true. And I know that sounds insane to say because we're living in the end times, but like Trump has had time after time after time after time to do more evil shit, and he has mostly just been an extension of previous policy of this government. Now, yes, you could argue that there's a lot more fecklessness in areas where there wasn't before, and so because of that, there's a massive, massive breakdown in our regulatory system and the actual functioning of government. I think that's totally true, and that's a valid argument. I'm just saying that from a Trump driving the train, and becoming the Hitler that these people fantasize that he has not taken those opportunities when they have presented themselves to him. And I think that, like this is a very thin line to walk here because I think that there is an argument to be made that of course he's like a bully, right? Like he bullies people about what they can say about him and can't say about him, but he's not really making it illegal or like abridging people's free speech through his own like dictates, which is a key um, facet of fascism, is that you have to get a control over what people are allowed to say and what they're not, because otherwise, that's just you can't get everybody on the same page. And my theory is that Democrats have been ratcheting this up as like, look, see, he's Hitler. Look, see, he's Mussolini. Look, see, like it's the end of Western society or whatever. And it hasn't quite gone that way. And for regular people who are just trying to like make it, right? Just trying to live an average life. How much has your life changed under Trump, really? Good, bad, or indifferent? Like how much of your economic status has changed under Trump? And then you have to ask yourself, is if you say my economic status has gotten worse under Trump, right? Okay. Then you have to then say my economic status has gotten worse under Trump at a more rapid rate than I have experienced with previous presidents. And if the answer is not an overwhelming, yeah, it's fucked and he has screwed me completely, then that's not going to motivate the massive amount of people, the people who don't normally vote for whatever reason. That's not going to motivate them to do anything because to them, it's all just one big cluster, and who cares? So I think they're really fetishizing the idea that we are going to just descend into chaos November 3rd and following November 30th. And because it's the big payoff, right? Like, why else have you spent your entire, the last 3 years of your life putting out yard signs and tweeting all day and sharing shit on Facebook endlessly? Why else would you have done that if not to be like, ooh, I told you so when this happens? And so they just want that payoff. Institutions, normalcy, all that be damned. They just want the like social orgasm that is going to be like, ha, see, I told you. I told you that this was going to be the end of America as we know it. And the problem with that is the people who have the opportunity to stand between the end of America as we know it, as they say, and what's happening right now are literally Democrats. And not like crazy ones like AOC and Bernie and all them. Not the wackadoodles even. Literally the Pelosi, Feinstein, Schumer, these people. Dianne Feinstein fascinates me. The delegation, the House delegation from California is fascinating, to be honest. See, your two, biggest, most high-profile members, and probably most like accomplished as far as their position in the House, are Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein. Nancy Pelosi is barely coherent. She's a poor public speaker. Let's just put it that way. And she is the Speaker of the House, not because she exhibited any sort of leadership skills or she passed any sort of incredible policy or she, did something amazing for the American people and therefore there was this resounding groundswell of support and she was elected. No, no. She was picked as the Speaker of the House because she raises the most money. And she is known as a mammoth fundraiser because she has all of these connections. She takes corporate money. And so they were like, well, you're the Speaker of the House. And the problem with that is when they made her the Speaker of the House, they then made her unelectable because she's raising so much money for other candidates and other House members that if they go against her, she will fundraise their primary opponents. She will fundraise for their primary opponents. And so she has built a steel cage around incumbent Democrats that agree with her. Not all incumbent Democrats, because she did not endorse Ed Markey, but the ones that agree with her, she has built this like castle around them. And so she has said that they shouldn't be primaried. She raises an infinite amount of money for them. She campaigns on their behalf. She makes sure that they get their little line item bullshit pork in all the House bills. And she fights off the opposition from the left that would be primarying these people, the AOCs, Ellen Omar's. Like she's the one that was like the green magic deal or whatever. Nobody knows what it is. That's what she said about it. Green, the green dream or something is what she said. The green dream or whatever it's called. Nobody knows what it is. She's the Speaker of the House in the opposition party. Now, if Mitch McConnell said that, you could be like, oh, okay, makes sense. But she's the Speaker of the House in the opposition party to the nutbags. Like, she's the one that's supposed to be standing up for us. And so the Democratic Party is run by her. And then the other House rep from California is also hilarious. That's Dianne Feinstein. And Dianne Feinstein is the oldest woman that has ever lived. She is 1,837 years old. And she, just sheerly due to her seniority in Congress, Nancy Pelosi has deemed it that Dianne Feinstein be the head of the Judiciary Committee for the minor. She will be head minority member on the Judiciary Committee. The so in the House. The hilarious thing about that is the Judiciary Committee in the House is going to be the first people that have to deal with a contested election. She's 100 million years old. She's 87. She's 87. And people within her office and the party have been quoted as saying, like, we don't know if she really knows what's going on. Congress is the best example of the dynamic that I've been trying to talk about recently, which is that the boomer generation, right? They created, let's be real. They built a very profitable country with, I mean, mostly backbreaking work. Now, granted, um, we had also leveled the rest of the planet, basically. I mean, there were no other huge economic superpowers because we either dropped a nuke on them or Germany had eradicated them, and they were in the middle of rebuilding. And so, yes, they got a head start, but for the most part, America worked hard and did backbreaking work. The working class of America did backbreaking work through government jobs programs to build an incredibly efficient uh, and high functioning country that ended up producing an economy that is just enormous, right? Of course, it's the wealthiest country the history of the earth has or the earth has ever seen. Sure, right? So the boomer generation is largely responsible for creating this wealth. And what they do is they crouch on it, smaug like, as we've talked about before, in their cavern with their collection of gold doubloons, literally hoarding the wealth that they created, right? And every once in a while, one of them dies, and their Gen X child inherits their money and, buys a car dealership or fucking like starts a comic book shop or like a coffee shop where you can sit with your cat or whatever the hell with their inheritance money, and then pisses that all away, and then the millennial and the Gen Z are just screwed, right? The millennial and the Zoomer are just screwed, right? Out of that generational wealth. That's how it works for the most part. Uh, and so boomers, right? They're hoarding all of this wealth, but they're also doing that with power because you have some of these people, Joe Biden included, that have literally been uh, in power in this country for 40, 50 years. That they've been in the House, the Senate, and they are governing a country that they will not live in for more than another decade at most, and a country in which people under 30 or under 35 or whatever the cutoff is for millennials and younger are the largest group of people in this country. And yet all of the decisions are being made by our grandparents. Imagine, dude, I wouldn't let my grandparents filter my email. And they run our entire society from top to bottom, the whole thing. Now, that's changing slowly but surely, right? But okay, like it's like we've talked about on the stream before. Like we're at, we're 10 years away from just irreversible nightmare of climate change. And largely the downfall of America has been the boomers sitting on the deck of the Titanic playing the violin while the whole thing goes down. Uh, if not directly, indirectly financing, lobbying to uh, stop tax hikes on their income, to try and kill the so-called death tax, the estate tax, to uh, deregulate our financial system. All of these decisions have been made by boomers. I mean, yeah, you have the occasional Rand Paul or right? I mean, I think Rand Paul's a Gen Xer. Rand Paul, Paul Ryan. You have these occasional guys that come in and do damage as Gen Xers, sure, but only because they are being backed and pandering to the boomers. And that generation will forever and ever, amen, be known as the generation that, yes, created America as the global superpower, hyperpower that we are today, but then literally hoarded the profits and the features of that society that they built, uh, and did nothing to advance the interests of future generations. Very little. I'll say very little. Now, you could say individually, of course, boomers help their own grandkids go to college or their own grandkids get their first home or whatever the hell, of course, right? Of course, of course. I'm not saying that they're evil people. I'm just saying that they were the first generation to conceive themselves as a generation. All of the other shit is retroactive. There wasn't like the silent generation and all that bullshit was just shit that we made up. They didn't call themselves that. But boomers were the first people to self-conceive as a generation, and they basically they had generational unity to basically say like we don't have to share. We made it. We're keeping it. Screw you, right? So yeah, it's going to be it's going to be really funny. It's going to be really really funny. Um, just because it's not my problem anymore. It's going to be really funny when Trump does whatever Trump's going to do about the election, and then the Democrats do nothing. I mean, they just do nothing. It's going to be really, really funny. They're going to get absolutely owned on the Supreme Court nomination. They're just absolutely going to get steamrolled on that. They're not going to do a single thing. It's very clear that they're not going to do a single thing to stop that or a single thing to make that a, quote unquote partisan issue. Uh, no, none of that. They're just going to roll over entirely uh, and allow them to do that. And because their calculation that they're making, which is incorrect, but to be fair, the calculation that they're making is it is more beneficial to them if the Republicans keep making themselves look like hypocrites and jackwagons than it would be to uh, actually call the Republicans hypocrites and jackwagons and fight them. And so they have decided that they have basically taken this tact that it is up to the American people to decide whether or not the Republicans are hypocrites and jackasses, which is true. That part is true. But they want that to happen in a vacuum. They want that to happen without them actually having to message that way or them actually having to say it. Because saying it is rude and saying it is partisan. I don't know who saw I don't know if y'all saw the clip of Trump just getting heckled, basically booed, just completely just booed like a professional wrestling heel at at when he went to the Ruth Bader Ginsburg viewing. she's lying in state. It is it is the stuff of like you couldn't write it better. You couldn't write it better. He's standing there with like his whole face tucked into this mask, right? Because he's got like, jowls. And so all of his jowls are packed into this spandex presidential mask, right? And he's all squished in, and he's got all his shit held in like Jabba the Hutt. And he walks up and he just, he stands at the 45-degree angle that he stands at, and he's looking down at he's like up on it's very eerie. He's like up on this like upper level staring down at the casket, just like, yeah, all right, that's a casket. It's very weird. And the crowd, I mean, I don't know. They never panned to show how many people were there, but it was loud. I mean, I would guess it was several hundred people at least. Or just going, vote him out, vote him out, vote him out, right? And he's just standing there not reacting to it, but under his mask, he's just like, these motherfuckers, these ungrateful. I had the best economy, I had the best unemployment, I had the best, I'm the best president, and they don't even know. They don't even know. And he's just getting, right? And so he just turns around and leaves. That scene right there, like that clip of that happening, is going to be 30 years from now on the History Channel or whatever, streaming service that has become at this point, is going to be like the crest of America's downfall, basically. Like, you know, pandemic happened. Let me see if I can do this all on camera. Pandemic happened. It started to get pretty bad, but people got hopeful around the election, and then they were really thinking that it was going to work out. And then this clip happened, and then the election was overturned by Trump and the Supreme Court and the Senate, and Vice President Mike Pence was the vote to break the tie, and then everybody just descended into, and then they put the leftists in camps and Antifa in camps. Yeah, like that's going to be the like the quintessential moment. They show the like clips. If you ever watch like the Nazi Germany like documentaries and shit, they show the clips of Hitler like up on the big plinth, and he's giving the big like strike gears about. He's like doing the whole like arm movements and like crazy screaming and shit. And they show that as like he was very charismatic. He really convinced a lot of people. And that right there is a very similar dynamic to the clip of how they're going to use that of like people just literally just owning Trump at a funeral. Like how mad do you have to be at a guy to violate the cultural norm? I mean, people. We talked about this when we talked about the Donald Trump town hall. People are angry, man. Like, and they should be. They absolutely should be. But they're angry and they don't have a place to channel that anger. Like there is no one actually saying like, "I get that you're mad." Bernie did. You could say that you could say that Bernie did. There's nobody saying that like, "Hey, I get that you're mad, and I agree with you. This is horseshit." These people talk out of one side of their mouths and tell you that they're going to do X, Y, and Z to fix your problem, and then uh, they pass a tax cut for rich people, or they export your job, or whatever the hell. And so people should be mad. But it's such a shame that anger and like that political action is totally going to waste because there's nowhere to put it. We're so disjointed as a society and so apolitical that there's nowhere to put it. There's nowhere to put these people that are mad. They just, you know, they just tweet, or they just like, you know, or even worse, they just completely disengage, and we're losing them. We're losing them from the process entirely. And that's a problem because if we don't believe in electoralism and in getting people involved in the process, then what is the effing point? What is the point? I've been thinking about I've been thinking about how Ben Shapiro is uh, is moving to Tennessee or something, Texas. I don't know. He's moving out of California, and he made this big thing about how like he made this big statement. He tweeted like big announcement coming, and then he released this video of him in his fancy studio talking about how like I'm moving out of California, and I have to tell you why. I it has become a hellhole to live in, and I can't do it anymore. And my wife, she has wanted to stay here. I've lived in California my whole life, and my children can't walk down the street without uh, coming into contact with heroin needles and whatever. Right? Ben Shapiro's a multi millionaire. His company's generating millions and millions of dollars a year in revenue. He doesn't live in a place. There's no way that he lives in a place where his children go outside to play soccer or whatever the fuck, or like beat up black kids that live in the neighborhood, and and they're running into heroin needles. Like that's not a thing. So this brings me to a fun little dynamic that is developing, and you will, if you haven't heard this from your, like older relatives already, you'll probably start hearing it around the holidays, which is like cities, major cities in this country, are seeing a flight, essentially, of people who are moving out of the big cities because they're run by Democrats and it's a nightmare and um, whatever the fuck, right? And there is a little bit of truth to that, right? Some of it is due to like we have a plague going on, we have a pandemic, and so some of it is due to the fact that like people don't want to live in intensely crowded areas, and so they're getting out while they can. Thinking that this will go on for some time, and it's just the time to cash out, wash my hands of it, and move out to the suburbs, right? If I have the means to do so. But the big giant part of it is that these people have realized, right? Ben Shapiro has 70, 80, 90 something employees. These people have realized that post COVID, especially, but even before that, that capital is the only thing that has free movement around this country. So if they own a large organization or even like, a small propaganda outlet like Ben Shapiro, then they are in the position where they can have people work from home or downsize significantly on their either their staff or just their office space because they can have some people work from home. And they can accumulate more capital based on the fact that they're not making those expenditures. And so what they're doing is they're saying, well, if I don't need to be so close to places like to media centers, plain, I'm leaving on a jet plane. Anyway, so they basically say I don't have to live near these big city centers anymore because Zoom is the new norm. Because I can do things remotely. I can have people work from home, and plus, if I move my business from a big city where there are more people and therefore a need for higher tax revenue to a suburb, I can get a tax break, and that's all true. But the benefit to that is going to be the problem in these cities is not the way that they're run by the Democrats or like some sort of obscure like values argument. The problem in these big cities is the housing market. The housing market in most major cities is complete dog shit. In most major cities, you have two, three, four times as many empty dwellings in them as you do homeless people. And so there is a for people who really just like freak out about being in the free market and like We got to make sure that the market dictates all this nonsense. They are ignoring the fact that there is an enormous surplus of housing because people are just endlessly buying or endlessly building luxury condos and all that nonsense, and they're sitting empty while people are homeless on the street, and they're creating an enormous supply with no demand because people can't afford it. And the only people who can't afford it are already so rich that they're not throwing any money back into our economy and benefiting anybody. Or they're foreign investors that aren't even living in the property and they're just using them to launder money because we have loose real estate laws. It really is a nice day today. 84 degrees. Just a couple of clouds. Very nice. It goes back to the thing that we started talking about when the stream started, actually, which is capitalism's big story. The big story of why we need capitalism and what makes capitalism work, right? Is that it is the fairest, most equitable way to distribute resources across society. And the argument is that because you're taking people's bias out of it and leaving it up to the free market and leaving it up to this existential, all seeing, all knowing force of nature that they call the free market, right? If you are leaving it all up to this, then it takes human biases out of it. And the only thing that determines the growth within the economy and the society is your individual merit and your ability to provide value to the market. And therefore, the how can the allocation of resources be wrong when how can the allocation of resources be morally wrong when it's dispersing resources based on merit? How is that possible? Merit equals morality. Therefore, how is it possible that capitalism could be immoral? The problem is, right, a truly free market has to make profit on everything, literally everything. And there are certain sectors of society that should not have a profit motive. And I know that it is a hard concept. It is a very hard switch to flip in your brain. That there are just some things that capitalism cannot make a dollar off of: medicine, healthcare, war and defense, housing. These things are basic rights. They are basic individual rights that in a society, in the richest country that the world has ever seen, these things should be provided. And the reason being is that country is the richest that the world has ever seen because of the work of the citizens within that country. Like, we're not working for a company here. America is not a corporation. America should not make any profit on the labor of its citizens. It is a cooperative. It is a government, we the people, right? Like that's the whole idea. It's not like we work for a class of people that pull all the levers of power. No, no. This is supposed to be as direct of a democracy as possible. I don't know, man. It's very it's very optimistic to, or it's very, maybe the word that I'm looking for is like self-defeating. It's very self-defeating to still imagine that we live in a time where we have a say, right? Like, here's my fear. Okay, this is my fear. I am afraid that I basically see the trajectory of America in distinct two distinct paths. Okay, and I'll get to that in just a second. I'm gonna go get a beer. I'll be right back. No, you need a drink? Damn, I just stepped on something very sharp. Okay, sorry. I ran out of drinky drink, and I can't speak without drinking. Clearly, so sometimes it's coffee, sometimes it's tea, but in the afternoon it's White Claws. Um, so yeah, so I see America on taking two distinct paths forward. Okay, one is that Joe Biden wins. Okay, and in my mind, I cannot see this going very differently from these two ways. So this is kind of my thesis. This is kind of my political thesis as in a nutshell. Biden wins. Uh, we have a little bit of a simmer down. We have a little bit of a come to Jesus about how excitable we all are right now. Not much of one because the right will still be losing their minds. But on the left, we kind of have a little bit of a okay. We can breathe for a second. Now let's get back to work and kind of figure out how we're gonna get what we need, right? And then nothing at all will materially change for uh, the average American because Joe Biden is going to twist the knobs a little bit. Like I said in previous streams, we might get DC statehood, Puerto Rico statehood, uh, some modest tax credits and improvements, and whatever, whatever, whatever. Maybe a coronavirus bill that's fairly decent, something. But for the most part, we're going to end up in the position of in 2024 when Joe Biden doesn't run because he said he's not going to, or runs. But at the very least, Joe Biden or Kamala Harris will run for president again. Any material changes to people's lives. Now, granted, We might feel better about ourselves. We might feel better about our economic situation. We might have tapered off some of the more like horrific conditions for people, but people still aren't going to have health care free at the point of service. People still aren't going to have like really good access to education. People still aren't going to have like we're not going to have a criminal justice system that is reformed. I mean, the big broad problems are not going to be solved, right? And in the absence of that, people are going to say, "Look, we listened to you. You said that it was figgity fucked if we stayed with Trump, and so we elected your ass, and our material conditions did not change, and they do not look like we're changing, or they are changing. And so we are going to vote for Tom Cotton, or Dan Crenshaw, or Ted Cruz, who has decided that moving even farther to the right and even more insane and scapegoating even more minorities and poor people is the answer, and being more efficient than Trump in deregulating our government and putting people in charge who are diametrically opposed to the popular ideas in this country. And we are going to be worse off. The other avenue is that Trump wins and we end up nearly completely deregulating our entire society, dismantling the guardrails for things like, for issues like climate change, women's health, uh, you name it, basically. I mean, any sort of regulatory state that we would need in place to counteract the basically any issue in society, any cultural or otherwise significant issue in society is literally going to be eroded between the fact that the courts will continue to swing just insanely to the right, the the EPA, FDA, uh, FCC, all of these are going to be just insanely understaffed, unstaffed, dismantled, and decommissioned, just in general. And there is, of course, a reason that these institutions exist, and they will be irreparable after term two of Trump. Now, you could argue that if the Democrats really do drop the ball on an election that is being given to them at this point, then you could make the argument that a Trump reelect would break the charm, the spell that has been cast over people who believe in moderate Democrat stances, the libs, if you will. And if you if Trump is reelected, that it's possible. I don't think that it's likely, but it's possible that those people are going to look at that and go, "Well, holy shit, this party is so feckless and incompetent and unable to actually push back against what they say they don't like, even that screw it." And they're either going to become disaffected voters that just say, "Screw it, I'm not voting anymore," which would be a huge blow to our democracy, considering most people don't vote anyway. Or they're going to demand a change in party politics to where the Democrats actually stand for something and do politics, and they are going to primary people, and they are going to restructure the opposition party to these cretins. And it's hard for me to decide which one of those is a better position to work from, because a part of me sits here and thinks about Martin Luther King wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail, basically talking about how white liberals were almost more detrimental to the fight against like racism or whatever than the actual people that were like uh, against it. You know what I'm saying? And I think a similar dynamic. I think a similar dynamic is developing between the progress that we need and the moderate approach. Because there is so much that needs to be done. Because there is so much that needs to be done. And you know, like, for instance, taking a moderate stance on climate change, you know, saying things like we can get to 100% renewable energy by 2050, when we know that by 2030 we are at a point of no return. We know that for a scientific fact, that if we do not dramatically change the way that society and capitalism exist on this planet, then we are going to be past a point of no return by 2030. And if your position is we are going to get to 100% renewable energy by 2050, then that is climate denial at this point. Moderation is climate denial at this point. Because we know what the facts are. We know what has to be done. We know what the timeline is. The science is in. And for you to say anything less than that being accomplished, you are denying the reality of the problem. And you are no better than the dumbass Republicans who go into the Senate or whatever. Who go into the Senate and with like a snowball in their hand. And they're like, look, climate changes are real. More and more people, man. Sorry, I got caught reading that thread. Like, more and more people. Doggo. More and more people, man, saying that they're not going to get the COVID vaccine if the COVID vaccine comes out. Man. Like, at a certain point, right? There's just a set of rules as a society that we have to all agree on. Like, we have to all be like, okay, big giant disease, we get a vaccine, yeah, we'll all take it. Like, there's just a certain amount of stuff that, like, in order to be a part of a society, in order to be like just a member of like a communal group where we all have to live together, we all just kind of go like, yeah, conspiracy theories aside, I'm going to be a normal human and just get the vaccine so that everybody can go back to normal. But we don't live like that anymore. It's very weird. Very weird. Outside streams, outdoor streams, we're a little more loosey-goosey here. Literally reading through some shit, seeing if there's anything to talk about. Yeah. Just a reminder that we still live in a society where people who murdered Breonna Taylor are never, ever, ever, ever going to answer for it. But the protesters who shot 2 cops last night will probably spend the majority of the rest of their lives in jail. And those 2 cops are going to live. Worth thinking about. I will reiterate, man, because I don't feel like we can have these streams anymore. And since we're coming up on an hour, I'm probably about done. But I will reiterate that if you're going to vote, vote early, vote in person, get it done. Get your shit in the count early. Because I can foresee, I don't know if there's any way around with all the legal predicates that are being set right now. I don't know if there's any way around making the argument that there are going to be a certain number of ballots at some point that are going to be thrown out. And the earlier and the more in person that you are to do that vote, the more likely, I think, that it's actually going to end up counting. You know, and if you're going to vote for Joe Biden, great. Fantastic. If you're going to vote for Trump, great, fantastic. I just think that you should vote. You know, there's no way that we're going to be able to run a society at any point if people don't participate in its functioning on a basic level. You know, like this is basic politics. Voting in a presidential election every 4 years. That's not even politics. That's just like identity. Man, I will say this before I get off. There's been a a resurgence on my social media ecosystem of the whole like police officers have a difficult job and therefore we need to take their fears and concern into account when we make these decisions about how we're going to allocate society's resources. And I just want to say, no. No, no, no. Absolutely not. This is a democracy. We allocate the resources of our tax dollars and what we do as a government based on democratic means, where people want them to go. It is clear that people do not want them to overwhelmingly go to police departments. This is one of those things like what we talked about the other day. They should be on a direct ballot somewhere. There should be somebody saying like, hey, you go to vote for president, at the bottom it says, hey, should we cut, police departments by 25% and give that money to mental health care, social workers, all that type of stuff. So, I feel a little more optimistic about where we're going, because I think that both outcomes on the two roads that we talked about earlier, I think that both outcomes lead to more progressive, more representative government over time. Now, it may take 30 years, and by that time we're all going to be really, really fucked. But, at least we can mitigate, right? It's unfortunate that we won't be able to curb most of the effects of what is going to happen to the earth. But we can at least mitigate. We can at least slow down. We can at least make livable as much as possible for the people who are left. Not to sound too dramatic, but like the people who are not devastated. We can do our very best to provide for those people. You know what I mean? So. Anyway, go vote. Go vote early. I know that it really hurts mentally, morally, physically, in fact, to go and just like pull the lever for one Joseph Robinette Biden. But I would much rather negotiate with him than negotiate with people who don't believe the earth is round. It's a much better starting point. So, alright. Y'all have a good night.